Welcome to the Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar. This webinar will be on best practices for creating a custom connector, and our presenters will be Kevin Goerlitz and Jimmy Wu. I'll turn it over to them to take us through this content.
Hello, this is Kevin Goerlitz. I'm the product development architect for the BMC Helix integration service. And
my name is Jimmy Wu. I'm a lead product developer for the integration service.
So the agenda will give you an overview of custom connectors and best practices, talk about the setting up the environment, and then we'll have a demo of the creating a custom connector, and then go through some troubleshooting. So let's get started. Okay, so overview, custom connector. So with the integration service, you can design and automate some event-driven tasks across the application, and the integration service comes with a collection of application integrations that we call connectors, that each connector goes to a particular BMC or third-party product or service. And if a particular connector does not exist, or the existing connector does not meet your needs, you can build a custom connector from scratch or customize it to fit your needs. Custom connector, a connector, the integration service is comprised of the BMC Helix Integration Studio, which lets you configure connectors and design flows. The BMC Helix Connector Designer is used to develop, build, and deploy custom connectors. And then we have the Integration Controller, which is used to run connectors on-premise for connecting to your on-premise services. And with the custom connectors, you start off with the connector designer, and you set up your development environment. You develop, test, and build connectors and deploy the connectors from there. In the Integration Studio, you create your configurations and account credentials to access the service. In the Innovation Studio, you can also create processes that would make calls to actions within the connectors that you define. And then end user can make use of the applications that make use of the processes within the Innovation Studio. Okay, so elements of a connector. A connector may have multiple of these things, but at least it has to have at least one trigger or one action in order to work. A trigger is used to identify records that should be processed by a flow. So it will go out and connect to your service and retrieve the records. So the records are identified by a trigger are sent for processing by the flow individually. Different triggers may be defined for different types of data in the service with which the connector is communicating. So, such as ITSM has incidents, change requests, problems, things of that nature that each one would have its own trigger. The trigger defines any parameters required for the trigger, what fields are available for mapping it to an action, and what fields and qualifiers are used for specifying conditions on the trigger. There are four types of triggers. We have pulled triggers, which is the most common type of trigger. For a pull trigger, the flow run will retrieve records that have been updated since the last flow run. So keep track of the last date from the previous flow run and the next flow run will retrieve the records that have been updated since that flow run. You can have a webhook trigger, and a webhook, or just a REST post call back into the integration service, is sent from that service when there is data to be processed. So that's actually more efficient than polling, but there aren't that many services that support that yet. We can also do an email-based trigger where you can send in an email and it can be processed. The data in the email can be processed by the flow. And then we have a listening trigger, and this type of trigger, it keeps the connection active to whatever service that you're talking to and receives data streamed to it to be processed. Then for actions are used to perform defined operations on data in the service, such as creating a record, updating a record, possibly deleting a record, provisioning a system, things of that nature. Again, different actions may be defined for different types of data. So if you're creating an incident versus creating a change request, those would be two different actions. And an action defines the input data fields that are required or allowed for that operation, as well as any output fields that are returned from that operation. And the output from an action may be mapped into the input for a subsequent action when you define a flow. And then lookups. Lookups are used to retrieve allowed values for any particular field from the service for specifying condition values or setting mapping values in the UI. A lookup may be associated to several different fields across multiple triggers and actions. So you can have a single lookup defined that can be referenced by multiple triggers and actions, or multiple fields in multiple triggers and actions. Okay, some best practices. So for naming a connector, it's usually best to name your connector based on whatever service you're trying to talk to. So if you're, in this case, if you're trying to talk to LinkedIn, name the connector LinkedIn, things of that nature. Configuring a connector, you should make define configuration parameters for a connector rather than hard coding a configuration. That way, if your configuration changes, you don't need to rebuild your connector to pick that up. All you need to do is update the configuration through the UI. And while you're developing a connector, you can define those configuration parameters that the connector may need. For authorization and authentication, if that target application requires that information, you should define which type of information is needed. We have several types. We have basic authorization that allows you to specify a user ID and password, or in some cases it may be user ID and API token. You can rename the values as necessary to be appropriate for what's being passed in, but it will generally be used in from an API perspective in basic authorization. We also support OAuth 1 and OAuth 2 authorization schemes. For that, you need to identify exactly which type of OAuth is necessary, and there are a package that we use called Passport that we need a Passport schema to work with that. Okay, for naming a trigger. General guidelines here are, trigger name has to be unique within the connector. Don't embed blanks, because the name of the trigger is actually used internally as a method name. And generally, it's best to use a object action pattern for naming the trigger. where the object is the name of the object and the action is what what has happened to that object to trigger it. So in the case of where you're talking to a thing that has incidents, change requests, or let's say issues, you can do some trigger names such as incident created, record updated. If you're dealing with something like provision systems, you can have a system has been provisioned or system provisioned. Describing a trigger, the description of a trigger is what actually shows up in the UI. So you'd give it a naming such as that sort of follows the pattern of trigger flow when a certain event takes place. So it would be like, well, trigger flow when a new incident is created. So the description of the trigger would be new incident created, or record updated, or new system provisioned. Naming an action. In this case, the same thing has to be unique, no blanks, and for actions we usually follow sort of the opposite thing where it's action object, and it's basically what type of action you want to do on what type of object. So again, some examples would be like create an incident, update record, provision system. And same thing with the describing the action description is what shows up in the UI. So what type of action do you want to do? You want to create a new incident, update an existing record, provision a system. Okay, for lookups, retrieving values, if you need valid values for triggers or action input, you can define a lookup that would go down to the particular system and return a list of the valid values. And that lookup may require input from other fields that are defined there, in which case you can define what those required fields are so that you would have to fill in those other fields before you can do the lookup. And also, if the values have different internal and display values, you can return that, but the display values are actually what's used within the flow. But you can use that same method internally to convert from the display value to the internal value that you may have to pass into the service. For initializing a connector, we have an initialize method, and within that method, you should check the availability of the application, and if it's not available currently, let's say the service you're trying to talk to is down temporarily, you should return an error. For JavaScript-based connectors, you reject the promise with a service availability error. For Java connectors, you throw an exception of service not available exception. And when developing the connector, it's probably best to add some console logging in the code to keep track of where it is, what the data you're dealing with is, and when you finish debugging, remove those extra console logs. And again, we have some built-in logging, but all that logging gets sent to the central log service for the service. And because of that, you should not want to log any data that way that is in any way sensitive data or proprietary type data that may be passing through the system. Okay, we sort of say there's two ways of developing a connector, but actually usually both are needed. So you can use the connector designer to set up your triggers, actions, lookups, and then generate the code. then that generated code you can, and you quite often need to go in and edit that code, modify it, customize it to handle your specific changes. Because especially for error handling, because every service sends error responses back differently. There's really not a standard way that services return those errors. So in development, you can run your tests using a local test script, which we have available on the communities page. So you can do a test, use the test driver to run it locally and to validate all of your triggers and actions, and lookups are processing correctly. And obviously with development, you make your code changes, retest, and so on. Once your development is complete, you can deploy the connector to the integration suite. At that point, it can be deployed to a production controller. So the connector development environment setup, you set up your developer environment to create, test, and build the connectors, and then deploy the connectors to the integration studio. The installation, you'll need to have Docker installed. Then you can install the connector designer, and within the connector designer, you can start up a local integration controller, which is really only a partial one that's set up to only run connectors that that are under development, and is not supposed to be used as a production environment at all. And then, of course, you can, on a separate system, install the production integration controller, which you can then deploy the connectors to once they're done or once they're ready. And we do have a validation utility on the community to check to make sure that the environment is set up properly. And we're going to show you a demo here in a moment, and just going to walk you through the steps we're going to do here. We'll create a connector project, update connector details, setting various information in that. We'll add a trigger and define that, going through the different things that you might need to set up. Create an action, setting up all the name, definition, input and output fields for the action. And then we'll build the connector and show you how you can test the connector and deploy a connector. And for deploying a connector, as it says, you must have a production integration controller or production site set up, and it must be online. And then we'll, after the demo, we'll come back to the troubleshooting. So I'm going to hand it over to Jimmy, who's going to run through the demo.
All right. So to install the connector designer, first, usually you come to here to log into the integration studio, and then log in as a tenant admin. And then you can come to these sites and use this button to add one more. I just wanted to show here development sites. So you can say up to this one, you can save it here and then save it. So from here, you take a look at this field, say install connector designer. Click on it. Actually, it's a link that link to showing that this agreement. First, you need to agree on it, accept the agreement, and then it would went on this page that tell you what you need to do for your to install the connector designer. So basically, we support the Windows and Linux, and of course Mac OS as well. So based on what you fit, or either you install in the VM or a physical machine box, and based on what type of it, you can download the script to there, right? So, for example, I wanted to download it to install it in the Linux. Then I click on this one, then it would download the script for me, right? And for that, the box, the prerequisition would be like Kevin already mentioned that you need to have the Docker and those kind of stuff, right? So you can there's also a script that you can verify your environment to make sure that it properly installed here. So let me go down to the I have this one here. So I have this development size already in here. So let me show you what I have here. The script, suppose the script is downloaded in here, right? So I wanted to point out for this script is that since this is my VM, and I wanted to make it visible by other boxes as well. So I wanted, after the download the script, before you run it, you need to change this IP address. Originally, I believe it's 127.0.0.1. So if you change it to 0.0.0, then the other box in your network can see this box as well. So that when it's started up, then you can use the other box to access to the designer started in this box. So that's me. So you can just run this script in here, and it would pull the image for you, for this designer to start up. So when it's started up, you will see this one. Actually, is this one started here. Only one image, one container is started up. And for the other container is because I already start the controller on this side. So so let me show you what you can see here. Yeah, this is the one that I access to my designer 3000 box. And when the first thing, you can start up your integration controller. So come to here, come to this page, click on that, and then put your integration service URL here with the name, username, password. Then you would see the size that you define it in that on that integration service, and then you click on that star. Then the image would be automatically downloaded to this site and started up. So those three containers is started up for me. That I already started up, so it's running, and you can see it right here. The site is like a green check. That means the site is on. It connect to your integration service. So coming back to here, it would say online here for this development site. So everything is ready for you for the connector designer in this case. So let's go back to here to create a new connector. So I can click on this drop down list to create a new connector, and there's a two type of connector we supported. One is JavaScript and the other one is Java. So for the JavaScript, we kind of use this one as a demo because it's kind of naturally to support the REST API call. So that's use this one instead the Java. So when I click on that, it would come down to this general page of your connector. You need to fill in some information here. So as mentioned by Kevin before, for the naming convention here, you usually wanted to name the connector to similar the name of what you connected talk to the application. So here I wanted to say it's this connector would be connected to GitHub. So because we have one GitHub connector already, so I would name it like another GitHub like that. And the description is you can put, it's not required field, but it's better that since this description will show in the integration UI when you deploy it, so it's better that you give it some description. So I would say my GitHub connector. And for this version, if you check this auto update, when you say later on, when you say generate code, it would automatically update the version for you, just increase by 1, something like that. And you can specify the category, since it's pretty important, because after you deployed it in the integration studio, we show the connector based on the category. So to make it like it's other people, other team member can find it easily. So you wanted to give it the right category. So in this case, I wanted to say the project management, and you can put the like a company logo or any image you wanted to put it. You can load it from file here. So for demo purpose, I just leave it default. And for those 4 fields, it's not required, but it's better that you can put it in so that the other people can know that what connector is these ones belong to. So it's up to you. I mean, you can fill in those, right? So for next session is about the authorization. You can, since we support different type of authorization, for example, like I can choose a basic. So for the base, if I choose basic, it would already fill in like a URL. This is the URL path that your connector would talk to your application and to get the authorization. And realize that there's also like a 2 field that automatically generate for you, which is marked as required, because when you need authorization, basic authorization, you need to fill in some username or password, and you also can customize this name that is, because it's kind of displayed in here. So I call it token about that. And one more thing I wanted to point out is that here in the configuration, it already automatically put the URL field for you. This URL would be referred by this URL here, service URL here. So it means that you can configure your connector that pointed to some URL that your organization has, a GitHub application, and it's like different. So you don't have to modify the connector code and recompile such that you just change your configuration and then refers to here in the service URL. And you can also customize here the subpath here. So anything that you wanted to put it here, that should be fine here, right? And you can also add your own configuration field. Like if you need more parameter to configure your connector, then you can add it here. So for us, for the demo purpose, I would just use this default. And next is for the API definitions. Basically, you can choose a file that since we support open API, like a swag file, those files you can download from your application vendor. That usually, if they support the open API, they would provide this file for you, and then you can download it and load it here. It's pretty convenient. Later on, when you create the trigger or actions, you would feel a lot of field for you, so it's convenient here. So I wanted to choose this GitHub Swagger that I downloaded from the GitHub web. So here I loaded this file. So next one, I would wanted to create a trigger. So again, the naming convention here. So I wanted to like, for example, like I wanted to say user updated for the user field. And then by default, it will be the pool. So for this field, you have like a different choice here, as mentioned by Kevin before. So I would just take the pool type, and then here the next section is that you wanted to specify your trigger definition. You can have like either enter manually or use the swagger that we loaded in the general session before, or use a suggestion JSON file that you wanted to use. Either way is working okay, but for the convenience of this demo, I would just use the swagger file that I loaded, so it would be available for you to choose here. You can load, by the way, you can load it multiple JSON file in the other section, and then you can choose it from here. So so I choose this file, and so take a look at this one. It's already like showing me a lot of requests can be used with this JSON file. It's all come from this Swagger file. So I wanted to pick one of the maybe the get a single user. Okay, let's see. How about that? Get a single user, and then I click on these create fields. It would fill in some input file for fields for me already. So of course you can customize it by click on this add in field or add the output field. So input field is more related to the URL call that here, right? It's more like an output field is like the response from your REST call for that. So it's all mentioned in previous Kevin's talk. And so yeah, pretty much that is it for the create this trigger. And next I wanted to create one action too. So here again the same thing here. So I wanted to say create a git. So I wanted to load it from this Swagger file as well. So I choose that, and with this drop down list, I can say create a git. I choose this request, and then I click on this create field. So realize that it feel more field for me, right? So here let's input file, input fields, and the output fields all like fill in for me automatically. So I can just examine that, choose the different type here, or make it like require or show default, something like that. So it's convenient, right? So okay, I don't want to modify anything here for our demo, so I will accept by default, and now it's ready to generate the code. So come to this build page, I click on this generate code. It already generates the version, realize that the version increase. So the codes would always be put in here, this location. So Parama connectors and your connector name as a subdirectory under here. So let's check on that. So here there's a Panama directory, and there's connector subdirectory, and under that would be your connector name. So let's go inside, and here's all the code that it generates already for you. And wanted to point out is that this package JSON, right? usually you specify the dependency here. So some depends, since this is Node.js, so you can specify if you need more dependency, you can put your package here. So that is one. And there's a registration. This is file that it has all the metadata for your trigger action definition. And when it deployed it to the integration service, a lot of information here will be shown on the UI there. So since we have one trigger and one action, it's all in here. It would show, like this name, trigger name is user updated, and this action in here, create gets, and then all the field, input field, output field, would all created like registered in here. And the main file is this one. It's this another. So this is the main file. So you can see that there's a initialized method here already. Like it already create a bunch of the codes in here, and you can make change to it, to this file, accordingly. You can edit this file. One thing I wanted to mention that if you edit this code here, and then you come back to this generate, if you generate again, then it would be overridden with the the code from template. So be careful about this one. If you wanted to if you modify your definition in the trigger or action there, you wanted to regenerate it, but be careful that your code will be overridden. So you probably wanted to put a copy of your code somewhere, and then later on copy it back after you generate it. Otherwise, if you don't click on it, it'll be okay. And then after you generate, because I have already started this controller in my development site, so I can click on this register, and it will be registered with my integration server. It's registered, so I can start it up here. So when I start it up, it would run it in my development site, and then if you go back to the integration service, you would be able to see it, and then you can configure and configure your connector, and then create a flow based on that. So let's check on this one. So realize that this connector is now running on my development sites here. So it's up like 24 seconds because I started up, right? So let's come back to my server. So this version 14 is already here, right? So you can come to this page and create a configuration here. So I would say my GitHub development, and then you cannot choose the size here. So anyway, so it's that the URL you can only one URL you can configure. So you can put your customize the UI here, so that way it would pick up from the the service URL. So it will be just like that, when you try to talk to your application. And one more thing I wanted to point, Oh, it's this one. Okay, yeah. So that's one way to test your connector. You can deploy it to your development side and run it there, and then use the flow to try it out. Otherwise, you can use this test script, test driver, we call it, which are available in the BMC community. Actually, it's in here. If you go to the BMC community and search for the connector test driver, you would find this page, and in this page there's some download here. So first, it would be the this doc image document that it would tell you step by step how to run your test driver, and those are two different versions for your test driver, because it would for this one it would be working only in the Windows, and the other one is in the Linux and the Mac OS. So let me show you that in particular for that document that tell you step by step how to use your test driver. So it's basically you just need to set it up correctly, and then it just tell you how to unzip it and then set it up, and then just run some commands that it would kind of test drive your connector. You don't have to really connect it to any well, basically, yeah, you do. I mean, basically, you need to put some data in the test data, and then run, give the commands that tell the test driver you wanted to test the some trigger or some action like that. So it's all in here. So yeah, I think that's about it.
So if you're done with the demo, I'll get on with the troubleshooting. Okay, so for troubleshooting, we have several issues that we can walk through here. One issue is, well, you can't start the BMC Helix connector designer on Microsoft Windows. Possible causes: the connector designer is only supported on Microsoft Windows 10. If you're using an older version of Windows, it's not going to work. Docker is not installed as a native application, or Docker does not have access to the file system. So solutions, of course, are upgrade to Microsoft Windows 10 if you're not there. Ensure that Docker is installed as a native application, and ensure that Docker has access to the file system, and your local drive is shared with Docker. To share a drive, you navigate to the Docker settings, share drives. In the list of the drives, you select what drive to share. And then ensure that Docker is using Linux containers and not Windows containers. To switch to the Linux containers, and there's a documentation within Docker that talks about switch between Windows and Linux containers in the Docker documentation. But basically in the Docker desktop, there's an option to switch that. Next, if your integration controller cannot connect via a proxy server, so the possible causes, well, the designer is not picking up the proxy settings. So as part of the installation process, you would have downloaded that RCB CMD file or RCB SH file, and in that you can add the HTTPS proxy environment variables, or actually there's 3 environment variables you can set: HTTP proxy, HTTPS proxy, and no proxy, which would list the domains that you would not be proxying. So you can set all those up and make sure they're passed in to the RCB when it's started up. You save the file, run it, and restart the designer. Another issue here, the integration controller doesn't start. Possible causes, your username or password may have been changed on the integration service. The site used by the connector instance has been changed or removed in the integration studio. And the solution for those, of course, are update username and password, refresh the sites and start the controller, or refresh the sites, select a new site name from the list, and start the integration controller. Another issue, registration fails. It could be invalid user code. A user may have changed the registration JSON manually and may not be valid JSON. Solutions are validate the code and validate the registration JSON. Another thing, as Jimmy encountered, if that version has already been registered, it'll come back and say, version whatever has already been registered, or is already registered, which is more of a warning than an error, but you can always up the version and then re-register if you need to. So one of the issues on Microsoft Windows, you start up and the connectors that you have already developed aren't available in the connectors designer on Microsoft Windows. Common cause for this is on Microsoft Windows, it has an issue with Docker that if your laptop is restarted, the containers may restart before Docker shares the drives. As a result of that, you can't see your connectors that you already have. So the solution of that is to restart the connector designer by going to the command window and using command docker restart Panama RCB. If that doesn't solve the issue, reshare the drive where the connectors are, and then restart the connector designer again. And of course, additional logs may be recorded in your connectors. Like if you do some console logging, you can always view the logs by using the docker logs command. So docker logs, the -f will follow the logs, -t will show timestamps, and if there's a whole bunch, you can use there's a --tail option, and you can specify the number of log lines to show from the end of the logs. For setting log levels and messages going to the console, there's an environment variable, console log level, that will change the level. By default, if you go through the internal logger, it'll only record warning and errors to the console, but you could set it to debug, and then debug and info would also be recorded to the console. And then we have documentation that talks about developing connectors. So on the BMC Docs, and just do a search on integration service, then developing connectors. That's the end summary here. So environment setup, creating a new connector, test debugging, and best practices is what we went through.
Now I will take us through the closing, some self-help in contacting BMC. Our videos as well as this webinar recording are available via our YouTube channel. Once this information is posted, it is reflected in our Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy schedule, available at this communities link, as well as the product support pages that contain different videos, documentation, knowledge articles, combined based on product component. A very useful resource available 24/7. And as always, our technical support methods of contact via web, phone, and email, as well as the social channels as well. Thank you.